DisruptEDTV 2.0. Apologies for the technical difficulties. We should now be ready to go live. So welcome back to DisruptEDTV. We're going to be a weekly chat show happening here at Switch Aotearoa. You can join us live through the Switch Aotearoa Facebook page, or you can subscribe through the Switch Aotearoa YouTube station. So I encourage you to do so. So before we go any further, I'll get Steve to introduce himself, and then I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and we'll talk a little more about what we've got planned for this here channel.
Kia ora koutou, I'm Steve Mouldey, and I'm the principal at Age School in Takapuna. After, well, let's not count the years of being one of those teachers stamping his foot and trying to get things changing within, while trying to work on things like curiosity and creativity. I'm now principal of a school that is based on curiosity, creativity, sustainability, well-being, all those things that have been so dear to my heart in education for so many years.
Kia ora. And my name is Claire Amos. I'm the principal at Albany Senior High School. I have been a past colleague of Steve's. We were together as foundation staff members at Hobsonville Point Secondary School when that set up. And I'm also one of the educators that started Disrupt Ed, which is a Facebook group for educators who are passionate about changing education up in New Zealand and beyond. And if you're an educator watching this, I encourage you to join us at Disrupt Ed. But of course, the intention of this show is to not just be a series about education for educators. We want it to be a series that's useful for all of our community, whether it be students, parents, and basically we're really keen to hear from you in terms of the kinds of topics you would like to hear more about, the kinds of people you'd like to hear a little bit more from as well.
Because hopefully this will be the only episode of this where you've actually just got the two of us. We're actually going to bring
as fun as that is.
We're actually looking to bring in guests that are relevant to each of those topics that we cover.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we thought we would kick off today just covering a few of what are the things that are on top for schools and for educators in 2020. We're in a real time of change in New Zealand. We're in a really interesting political and environmental sort of climate at the moment, and that means that there's a whole lot of changes underway. So we thought we'd just cover, do a once over lightly of some of the big topics that you might hear about in schools, beyond schools, and about what's happening for our educators. And then we're really keen to turn it over to you to find out what you would like this show to be, who you would like to hear from, and the topics you would be interested in us exploring further. So one of the latest things that have come up as a news release is the climate change resource, and the desire for our Ministry of Education and James Shaw working with Chris Hipkins to announce a climate change resource that's going to be available in schools. Now, it's probably more relevant to you than me because it's a resource designed for our year 7s to year 10s. Yeah.
And I mean, I think the media around this has actually shown the real lack of understanding of the New Zealand curriculum.
Yeah.
Because it's a resource.
Yeah.
It's not, it's
not a mandated
It's not a
topic.
mandated thing, and again, it comes back to that power and problem of the New Zealand curriculum being in how flexible it is for us to adapt to our local curriculum. Now, I know that our teachers, with our real focus on sustainability, will look at this resource, but it's going to be one of many different resources they use. It's not like, oh, great, we're going to use this and this is the only thing we're going to use.
And I think in this day and age, schools are always looking for relevant context for teaching science, for teaching all of those subjects. So it would be very unlikely if it isn't touched on already or literally taught already. I know in our context at Albany Senior, our whole Year 11 science program has been based around climate change because it's a relevant topic.
It would be, to me, I would find it pretty rare to go across any school in New Zealand that hasn't had some aspect of climate change discussed and learned about.
Yeah.
It's, and I think that's just politicians getting up on their on their chance to take
it's an opportunity to get on their soapbox to get upset for the sake of getting upset, and so that's a hot topic at the moment. The other things that have been in the news lately, our schools have got an investment being sort of a once only top up of up to 400,000 being invested in each of our schools and helping them to improve their property and infrastructure and those sorts of things. As a principal, I mean, it's fantastic news. We're always going to welcome more funding. How we access it and exactly how we'll be using it is a bit of a work in progress, but you can be assured that your principals will be working with their boards of trustees and staff and community to decide how they can best spend that money, and it's a good thing.
The interesting bit about this to me is that it's been talked about. It's not quite there yet. There's also a timeline on how long boards have, because very soon, there's the changes to boards of trustees where they're not going to have full control over some of those property elements, and so it's interesting just to see how those timelines align.
When the news came out last year, I got a bit of a bashing online for calling it a bit of a lolly scramble and a bit of a political lolly scramble, in the sense that it did feel like it came out of nowhere and suddenly we were given a pot of cash to spend, when we'd been told not long before that how tight the purse strings were when we were negotiating for teacher pay and what have you. And my only concern thing is that when you get money in this fashion, do people spend it strategically? And I think we've got a real responsibility when we're spending taxpayer money to ensure that it's spent really carefully and really thoughtfully. So I, for one, am thankful for the top up in the cash, and we will ensure it gets used wisely in our school. It doesn't affect you, though, because you don't get any money.
No, zero for us. And I guess, actually, sorry, the other interesting thing there is how it was announced, and then afterwards there was the thoughts of, hang on, what about all the integrated schools actually do get that funding, but it's in a totally different way, and it hadn't been really thought through at all. Yeah.
And the other thing that, of course, has been in the news and will be rolling out this year is the no donations scheme. So if your son, daughter, or you're in a decile 1 to 7 school, those schools had the option to opt out of asking parents for donations, and in turn they would get guaranteed money from the ministry per student. It's ended up being more complex than they thought. Like all policies, and particularly policies in education, there seems to be unintended consequences with these when they get rolled out. And, you can see that things seem like a good idea, but not necessarily thought through, and it's highlighted some challenges and issues around what we can actually charge for in schools. Many schools are asking parents for money for a whole lot of stuff they might not necessarily be able to do so. Basically, if it's in the curriculum and they need it for learning, students shouldn't need to pay for supplies and equipment.
And a lot of schools, didn't quite realise that. And, and I know when this was all first announced, there was some concern around things like school camps and that. So the ministry have actually worked on, well, what does that actually mean? But I know these discussions have actually gone on for quite a few years. When I was on the New Zealand Board of Geography teachers, we were facing issues around this with...
Who supplies your coloured pencils?
No, with geography field trips.
Right.
In terms of, because obviously they quite often incur quite large costs. Yeah. And the ministry were trying to tell us that actually you can't charge for that because it's part of the curriculum.
And I know that there's still issues for outdoor education, because outdoor education is only really possible with parental contributions to the costs. So I know that there's a number of schools that are scaling that back. And, you know, we need to be really careful of the unintended consequences of any policy decisions, because the last thing we want is our young people to be less active and spending less time outdoors, you know, and so we do need to address that. One of the other biggies is, of course, particularly for our high schools and our senior students, are the NCA changes that are underway.
And the possible creep down to primary ages for part of that. Yeah,
and I'm glad to see that hopefully the literacy and numeracy stuff, I think, is that gone, or is it going to go? I've heard conversations that it's
talk of some changes.
Yeah, so that shouldn't be happening. But in terms of NCA, in case you don't realise, NCA Level 1 has always been optional for schools to be involved in, but that's something that's been highlighted. In terms of timelines and how it's going to affect our young people, this year is about drafting the Level 1 NCA standards, and they're going to be trialled next year. And so next year will be the first year that we see students using those standards, and schools can opt in and opt out of that.
And I think it's either science or biology already have some information out for consultation on the education conversation page.
Yeah, so if you're a secondary educator, make sure that you are following the education conversation website to get involved with the feedback around that, because they are massive changes. For the most part, they look like they're really exciting and promising changes. I for one, was not a fan of the initial NCA package when it was launched in its final stage.
That's putting it lightly.
But that said, I really am starting to understand that there's some real potential in having more sort of larger, more flexible standards. So one of the biggest changes, for those of you who are not so familiar with NCA, is the structure of the NCA standards. So in the past, at each NCA level, you've got all of the subjects. So say for English, there might be up to 9 standards, achievement standards, that a teacher and student can choose from to do in their class. And that means from school to school, there's a lot of variety around program design, around what students are getting assessed on and how they're getting assessed, which I actually think is a really good thing, because I'm big on personalisation and flexibility. But the biggest change is that they have stripped it back so that absolutely every subject will only have 4 standards available to them, and 2 of them will be internally assessed and 2 of them will be externally assessed. And external assessment may mean exams, it may mean portfolios.
And I think that's one of the best clarifications that's come out since it was all announced, is that external does not just mean exams, because that was a really big concern for me when I think of lots of the students that actually really struggle in that exam setting but have a lot that they can give, you know, when you think about our neurodiverse students. But they have said, look, actually this could be portfolios or other things. So
there is innovation happening in that space, which is absolutely fantastic. And so, you know, it's a watch this space time with NCA. You know, there's an opportunity to get involved with the drafting of Level 1 this year. There's opportunities to get involved and be a school that can be involved in the trials next year. So the idea is that by 2024, we should have fully implemented NCA, the renewed change package version. So that'll be an interesting thing to watch and watch closely, because I think now is the time to get involved before it gets too far. And then the other big thing that came out just as school was finishing up at the end of last year was the Education and Training Bill 2019. And, you know, the cynics amongst us often question the timing of when these things are dropped, often when school is wrapping up. But that's okay. It was an interesting document. This, of course, was the outcome of the stuff that was in the Tomorrow's Schools Task Force review and recommendations, amongst other things. We had poised ourselves for potentially some very radical changes. I mean, as it's turned out,
there's not much.
No, it's lukewarm. There's a few changes around some ECE rules and recommendations. In terms of what's happening for schools and their changes, I think the most interesting thing that I'd like to explore further is that there are some new Board of Trustees objectives. So obviously Board of Trustees are the ones who govern our schools in New Zealand. We're self-governing schools, and so that group of parents and community members are really important. And one of the new areas in this Education and Training Bill is the new Board of Trustees objectives, which, if they have teeth, could actually be quite transformational. So they are now expected to ensure that the performance of a school is no longer just measured by educational achievement, which has been the main measure, you know, looking at their literacy rates, numeracy rates, NCE rates. So now instead they're expected to look at educational achievement. They're expected to look at the physical and emotional safety.
Yeah, and that's it. And actually for the first time having emotional safety written in there. And I think that's a really major change that a lot of educators have been looking for quite a while. And I think there's a lot of families around the country that will also feel good about that as well. You know, when you think of the fact that New Zealand does have one of the highest bullying rates in the world. Yeah. And so actually having a really clear directive that actually we're responsible, you know, that each school must provide an emotionally safe environment.
And that, it should be pointed out, is for students and for staff. And then the other thing that I'm really passionate about and excited about is that all schools must prove that they are inclusive and cater to differing needs. And, you know, and this is a real area of work on for our schools in New Zealand. I think we're on a continuum in terms of how well schools cope with diverse needs of students. I know at a school that is particularly inclusive in terms of the students that we welcome and support, that we're often getting students who have left their prior school because they have felt like they haven't been catered to, and the fact that, you know, they're diverse in any number of ways has been an issue for them.
I mean, we've had students join us last year and before I arrived at the school who really arrived, you know, with trauma from their previous school experiences, and it takes a long time to unpack that. And we all know from all the neuroscience and cognitive science that actually until the brain feels safe, none of that cognitive stuff can happen.
And this, people need to realise this goes beyond dyslexia and autism. That's absolutely, those diverse learning needs are a really important part of it. But what I'm increasingly seeing is students that feel alienated because of transitioning gender, you know, those sorts of things. You know, I always, my heart breaks a bit for teenagers that don't feel like they can actually express themselves fully in their high school environment. I get frustrated day in and day out when we see young people feeling like they don't belong because of who they are, and that might be expressed through really strict rules around hair, around how they wear the uniform, and so on and so forth. I really think we need to move beyond that stuff too. So I hope when boards of trustees are talking about what inclusive means and catering to all learners, they see that bigger picture.
Actually think widely around what this really means.
Yeah.
And hopefully, you know, there will also be a lot of work from the School Trustees Association to help boards unpack this, because otherwise, again, it's going to be left on the schools to actually whilst trying to actually make sure they're doing their part, actually also trying to help you know, the community understand that.
And then the fourth and final objective is making sure that schools are actually giving effect to Te Tiriti o Waitangi, which is huge. It's massive. And we're actually seeing that come to the fore in lots of areas of work. I know that with the NCA development, all of the standards are having to look at embedding Te Ao Māori within them. So it's really good to see this becoming something for more than lip service.
Rather than just that token thing. I mean, again, I can go back to my geography background, where for years we've had, you know, a Māori concept that would be part of the skills exam. And often it was like a one or two short answer question thing. It's like, well, really, this isn't giving true understanding.
And in terms of schools as context, you know, like, it's got to go beyond the kapahaka, it's got to go even beyond the pōwhiri, and think about how can we make sure that our schools are genuinely honouring our bicultural. And
there's enough research and guidance out there, you know, when you go right back to the 90s with the start of all Russell Bishop and Mary Berryman's work, right through, there's a ton out there, and it's just actually now, they have to give real justice to it.
Yeah. So I think that's going to be something that's worth a real deep dive, because actually if we look at those Board of Trustees objectives, if they are actually put in place and actually properly dealt with, we've got a real opportunity to drive some change in our schools across Aotearoa. And then beyond that, there'll be all the normal things that are on top for people at this time of year, with all of the results coming out at the moment, and people having conversations about how we measure success and so on and so forth.
Means it won't be long till we get all the league tables and the and the Herald
and the Metro
so
magazines.
Yeah, and one really exciting project that I know there's been some talk around is Peter O'Connor at the Creative Thinking Project at Auckland University. We were talking last year around how you actually effectively measure creativity, and they've actually started to develop some real measures of that in schools.
We're part of their Creative Schools Index.
So that's the side of things I'm really interested in pursuing further.
Yeah. And so basically that's it in terms of the sort of national stuff that's on top. What's on top for you this year, Steve? What's your sort of focus?
My real focus and my reading over the summer was all around the area of emotional intelligence. Yeah. And so I had a good laugh this week when Jack Ma, and I think it was the World Economic Forum or one of those big things that's been going on lately, actually introduced the idea. Well, it was his normal talk where actually IQ great. Yeah. But actually, more successful people when we actually develop the EQ, the emotional quotient, and he's now actually decided that there's a third one, the LQ, the love quotient. And actually your ability to love. But I think the way that many schools in New Zealand have started to look at emotional intelligence and that side of things is through the ideas of empathy and that anyway. So to me that fits under there. But I know that's, whether you're calling it emotional quotient, interpersonal skills, social emotional learning, whatever phrase you're putting there, that to me is something that I'm really passionate about, and that I'm seeing a few schools around starting to do that. I know we've made it a really big work stream for us in our school this year. Actually, what does our curriculum for that look like, and how in terms of from our 5-year-olds right through. Yeah.
And I know for me, it's still doing that deep dive in terms of leading school change. I mean, I've been in my role 18 months now at Albany Senior High School. And, I see the job of a principal is to be a change leader. We're always looking at how we can improve outcomes and innovate. And, if there's one thing I've learned in 18 months is how complex change is for human beings. Part of you seems to think of it as an equation that you do X and you're going to get Y, and I've discovered that you do X and you get Y and Z and A, B and C. And so it's a really interesting time in what is my second full year this year as principal at Albany Senior High School, reflecting on what worked last year and what really did improve outcomes, because we've seen some significant improvements, but then we've seen some stuff that fell flat. And it's always that tension,
Isn't it amazing that whenever we're going to focus on this, but actually how you keep the focus on all of that at once, which you just can't do, but it's a way of actually, it becomes sustainable when we can focus on this, but this keeps going. Yeah, and that's definitely been a learning curve for me. I think the other thing that I've had to learn is that, change also takes time. I'm someone who has always been just a little impatient. And thinks that we can do everything all at the same time, and that's okay. We've built some foundations. For us, that was universal design for learning, and ensuring that we're walking the talk when it comes to being inclusive and living out our school mantra. It's not if you're bright, it's how you're bright. We've got some other stuff that didn't necessarily work out as well that we're going to be working on again this year around the concepts of assessment ready, and working with our students to make sure that we're assessing them when they're ready and not when we're just ready as teachers. And and that had some teething problems. It'll be a work on. And it takes time. I mean, I know that last year we, as a new principal coming in, of course you've got these new initiatives and these new things that you're sort of trying to get everyone to look at, but actually this is the year for us. Whilst we've also gone, right, here's our next steps, it's actually about making sure that the other bits get embedded into practice. I mean, I know we did all the work with Ross Green on collaborative proactive solutions, and how we actually view behaviour as that signal of actually I can't meet that expectation. And we've done some work, but actually it's really not embedded yet because it takes that time and practice to do that.
Yeah, and again, seeing what sticks and what hasn't stuck.
And trying to make sure that for our whole team, we get that ability. So we've got 2 new staff coming in.
Yeah.
And so thankfully Ross Green's actually coming to Auckland this year, so we don't have to go to Australia to see him.
Yeah.
So they'll see him in Auckland. But actually for our whole team, it's about how we actually demonstrate that ahead of time for them so they can come on board, and so that our all of our students and our parents actually understand that same language.
So one thing that would be good to explore here probably in greater detail, and maybe with experts from beyond education, is about that concept of leading change. Both of us are pretty passionate about design thinking, and I think design thinking tends to underpin our approach to leading change. And I think schools are an interesting place to try and be agile. And I have learnt the hard way that when you trial something and say, oh, that didn't work, let's do something different, people misinterpret it as having not researched the first idea first. And it's like, no, we're going to have to be brave enough to give things a go. Sometimes they're going to work, sometimes they're not going to work. It can't be guaranteed that the solution is going to be absolutely the solution that we land on. We've got to be willing and open to try new things. But yet
also accepting that actually the same actions are going to get the same results. Yeah. So, and so you actually need to have that courage.
Yeah. And I think this leads us nicely into the idea of what we can do with the show in terms of the topics we can discuss. We're really keen to hear from you, so please add them in the comments below and let us know what you would like to see us discussing on the future episodes of DisruptEDTV. We're pretty agile, we're pretty responsive, we're happy to try and rope in appropriate experts. If there's someone that you've got in mind that you think would be great to have on the show, who you'd love to hear from. I know some of the future episodes we're looking at, we've been throwing around the idea of the role of technology in schools. We've seen in the media a lot of discussion around banning of cell phones and that sort of thing. And we're keen to hear from you around your opinions. Should we be using more technology or less? Are you concerned about it? Are you not? Those sorts of things. And
the role of research in education, like there is a lot of research that happens in education, but often it's quite separate to what's actually going on in our day-to-day practice. And yet in New Zealand, we've got quite a few things actually happening trying to help bridge that gap. And so whether I'm quite keen to see if we could get like the Education Hub in, or maybe it's someone like Graham Aitken in to talk about the best evidence synthesis and those sides of things that really help to taking that research but making it practical for teachers to use, because we are a time poor profession, and it's and we want to do the best by our students, and so we actually need some help disseminating that.
Absolutely. And we also talked about the concept of well-being, and I'm really interested in anxiety. I think I've got a personal belief, I guess it would be, that I think we're at risk of pathologizing anxiety to a degree. Anxiety is quite a normal human emotion, and I think we're nearly turning it into an illness. And I'm really interested in how we can work with our young people, to support their well-being, to minimise their perceptions around, how serious their anxiety is, and to also recognise that it's okay. Anxiety can actually be a really useful thing to experience, because it's a way of, us understanding what we're worried about, taking greater care.
And that's, you don't want to actually have no emotion there. It's actually about that balance of emotion. And I really liked Rebecca Amos watching TEDx talk of hers, and she actually talks about, rather than well-being, she talks about inner sustainability. And I quite like that phrasing. I've been kind of letting that sit there over the last week since watching that, and it's playing around with some thoughts.
And I was just reading Brené Brown's Into the Wilderness last night, and she talks about her sort of experience growing up and what she went through. And then the more she talked about it, she realised everyone else was going through the same thing. So I think we've also got to acknowledge that this human experience has always been there. You only have to watch a John Hughes movie to understand, what it was to be a teenager in the 80s. And to be fair, there was a whole lot of anxiety then as well. We didn't necessarily label it. We didn't necessarily amplify it online. and turn it into what sometimes feels like a bit of an illness. And I think we have to be really careful labelling our young people. And that, you know, obviously those labels don't just count for anxiety, they account for all sorts of diverse learning needs as well. Yep, it can be, it's really useful to understand what's going on for learners and to understand if they've got diverse learning needs. I think we've got to be really careful when it comes to labelling our young people and it then nearly becoming a bit of a handicap or a hamstring for them in the future. And they need to understand that they're just how they learn, and you know, we've all got diverse ways of learning, and we can learn different interventions and strategies and ways of overcoming it.
And other topic ideas or possibilities is, you know, there's obviously been quite a bit of talk and action in New Zealand schools over the last couple of years about play-based learning. You could probably get that about any of the PBL, problem-based learning, project-based learning. You know, if we looked at, you know, the when do we use it, when do we not, what are the implications of that? If we have a whole lot of people that have whole lot of children that have come through primary schools with this, what does that mean for secondary schools later on? And so, yeah, I think there's something in that area as well that could be a really interesting discussion.
And we've got a really neat panel lined up for a few weeks' time with the educators that helped to form DisruptED. So we've got Maury Abraham from Hobsonville Point Secondary School, Natasha Himera from Rototuna Senior School, and Nicola Nawera, who's at Spotswood College, and they'll be joining us in a few weeks on the couch, maybe by then, to discuss what's going on for them and what's on top. But beyond that, we are really open to hearing from you and finding out who you'd like to hear from, what topics you'd like us to discuss. Feel free to throw it in the comments box below. We'll keep an eye on it over the coming week, and I'm happy to take your suggestions.
Yeah. That's it, really. That's it for today.
And a shout out to our new logo that was created on the fly just before the program. So thank you for that.
Thanks to the awesome Switch TV staff for sorting that for us.
And as we said at the beginning of the show, this will be a weekly live chat show. You can join us here. The kickoff time should be around 5 p.m. every Thursday. We'd love to have you part of it, so please throw your ideas, hats in the ring. If you want to come and join us, let us know and we can make space on the couch for you. So until then, thank you for being part of our event this evening. We apologise for the technical glitches and the delay. We'll hopefully be online around 5 o'clock next week.
All right, great.
Thank you.